Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Wait 3 seconds. I should have turned around the moment I saw the town. Should have trusted that sick feeling in my stomach when I crested the hill and looked down at Millbrook for the first time. Instead, I pulled over to check my GPS, convinced I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere along the mountain highway. The town spread out below me like a photograph left too long in the sun, all faded colors and indistinct edges. Victorian houses lined streets that seemed to follow no logical pattern, their paint peeling in long strips that fluttered in the wind like dead skin. A church steeple rose from the center of town, its cross tilted at an angle that made my eyes water to look at. And beyond it all, carved into the mountainside like a wound that refused to heal, was the mine. My car's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the absolute silence that pressed down from the gray October sky. No birds, no insects, nothing. I was supposed to be in Millbrook to write a travel piece for the magazine, Hidden Gems of Appalachia, or some such nonsense. My editor had gotten the tip from a freelancer who'd passed through the area months ago, claimed it was a perfectly preserved mining town with friendly locals and authentic mountain culture. The kind of place that would photograph well and make city readers feel nostalgic for a simpler time they'd never actually lived. The GPS showed I was in the right place, Millbrook, West Virginia. Population 847, according to the last census. But as I sat there looking down at the town, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with what I was seeing. I drove down the winding road, my rental car's tires crunching on gravel and scattered leaves. The houses looked even worse up close. Windows were boarded up or covered with plastic sheeting that had turned opaque with age. Porches sagged under the weight of collapsed roofs. Gardens had gone to seed years ago, leaving behind tangles of dead vines that climbed up walls and wrapped around fence posts like grasping fingers, but there were signs of life. Clothes hanging on lines between houses, though they hung perfectly still in the windless air. Cars parked in driveways, their paint jobs suggesting they were maybe 10 years old at most. A few had current license plates and inspection stickers. I parked in front of what looked like it might have been a general store, though the sign was too faded to read. Through the grimy windows, I could make out shelves stocked with goods. A bell jingled when I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first, not the mustiness I'd expected, but something else. Something sweet and cloying that made my throat close up, like flowers left too long in a vase. "Help you with something?" I spun around. Behind the counter stood a woman who might have been anywhere from 40 to 70, her face so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. Her hair was perfectly styled in a way that had gone out of fashion decades ago, and her dress looked like something from a 1950s catalog. "I'm sorry I didn't see you there," I said, trying to smile. "I'm a journalist." "I'm here to write about your town." Her expression didn't change. "That's nice, you staying long, just a few days. Is there a hotel or Mrs. Patterson takes boarders? Third house up on Elm Street. The blue one with the white shutters." I thanked her and turned to leave, but her voice stopped me at the door. "Mister, yes, you seem like a nice young man. Friendly advice, don't go wandering around after dark. People get lost in these mountains. Sometimes they don't find their way back." The way she said it made my skin crawl, but I nodded and stepped back outside. The air felt different now, thicker somehow. I looked up and down the street, expecting to see other people, but it was empty except for my car. Mrs. Patterson's house was exactly where the store clerk had said it would be, though blue with white shutters was generous. The paint had faded to a sickly gray-green, and the shutters hung at odd angles, but there was a neat sign by the front door, "Patterson House Rooms Available." Mrs. Patterson herself was another relic, dressed in clothes that belonged to a different era and speaking with the kind of formal politeness that felt rehearsed. She showed me to a room on the second floor that was clean but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The wallpaper was too bright, the furniture too perfectly arranged. It was like staying in a museum exhibit of a 1960s bedroom. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she told me. "We keep regular hours here in Millbrook." I spent the rest of the afternoon walking around town, taking notes and photos for the article. The more I saw, the more convinced I became that something was deeply off about this place. Every building looked like it was barely standing, held up by habit more than structural integrity. The few people I encountered, an old man sitting on a porch, a woman tending to a garden of dead plants, all had that same pale, waxen quality. They spoke to me politely enough, but their eyes never quite focused on my face. And then there were the details that didn't add up. A restaurant with a fresh coat of paint on its sign, but windows so dirty you couldn't see inside. A playground with new-looking equipment surrounded by houses that were clearly abandoned. Street lamps that flickered on as evening approached, illuminating nothing but empty sidewalks and dead leaves. I tried to interview a few residents about the town's history, but their answers were vague and contradictory. One man told me the mine had closed a while back but couldn't say when. A woman claimed the town was thriving while standing in front of a house with half its roof caved in. When I asked about specific dates or events, they'd change the subject or suddenly remember somewhere else they needed to be. By the time I returned to Mrs. Patterson's house for dinner, I was starting to question my own perceptions. Maybe I was being too harsh, maybe this was just what rural poverty looked like, and I was too much of a city boy to understand it. Dinner was served in a dining room that might have been elegant once but now felt like a stage set left too long in storage. The other boarders, an elderly couple who introduced themselves as the Hendersons, made polite conversation about the weather and how nice it was to have a visitor in town. But their voices had a hollow quality, like actors who'd been performing the same play for so long they'd forgotten what the words meant. Mrs. Patterson served pot roast that tasted like sawdust and vegetables that fell apart at the touch of a fork. I ate what I could and excused myself early, claiming I was tired from the drive. In my room, I tried to work on my notes, but I couldn't concentrate. The silence outside was absolute, no traffic, no voices, no nighttime sounds at all. Even the wind had died completely. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, that would prove the world hadn't simply stopped existing beyond the walls of this house. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep and went to the window. The street below was empty, lit by those flickering street lamps that cast more shadows than light. But as I watched, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A figure was walking down the middle of the street. At first, I thought it was just another resident out for a late-night stroll, but something about the way it moved was wrong. It didn't walk so much as glide, its feet not quite touching the ground. And as it passed under one of the street lamps, I saw that it wasn't casting a shadow. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Mrs. Patterson served breakfast with the same artificial cheerfulness, but I noticed she wouldn't meet my eyes. The Hendersons were nowhere to be seen. They checked out early, Mrs. Patterson explained when I asked. Had to get back to their daughter in Charleston, but I distinctly remembered them saying they lived here in Millbrook. I started to point this out, then decided against it. Something told me that questioning the contradictions in this place might not be wise. I spent the day exploring more of the town, trying to piece together its history. The library was a small building that looked like it had been abandoned for years, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the books were covered in dust so thick it looked like snow, but someone had left a stack of local newspapers on one of the tables. The dates on the papers made no sense. Some were from last month, others from 5 years ago, still others from the 1980s. But they all told the same story in different ways. Millbrook was thriving. New businesses opening, young families moving in, the mine operating at full capacity. The headlines proclaimed prosperity and growth, but the photographs told a different story. Even in pictures that were supposedly recent, the buildings looked old and decrepit. The people in the photos had that same pale, waxen quality I'd noticed in the residents I'd met. And then I found the article that made everything click into place. It was buried in a paper from 1987, just a small item on page 3. Mine disaster claims 47 lives. The Millbrook mine had suffered a catastrophic collapse, trapping nearly 50 workers underground. The rescue efforts had gone on for weeks, but no survivors were found. The mine was sealed permanently, and within a year, most of the town's population had moved away. I read the article 3 times, my hands shaking. 47 dead, the mine sealed in 1987. That was 36 years ago. I looked around the library with new eyes. The dust wasn't just neglect, it was decades of accumulation. The books were falling apart from age and moisture. The windows were so dirty they barely let in any light. This building had been abandoned for years, maybe decades, but someone had left those newspapers for me to find. Someone who wanted me to know the truth. I stumbled out of the library and back onto the main street, looking at everything with fresh horror. The clothes hanging on the lines weren't drying, they were rotting. The cars in the driveways were rust buckets held together by wishful thinking. The people I'd been talking to, I saw one of them now, the old man who'd been sitting on his porch yesterday. He was in the same position, wearing the same clothes, but now I could see through him to the broken boards of the porch behind him. My vision blurred, and for a moment I saw Millbrook as it really was, a ghost town in the most literal sense. Empty houses with collapsed roofs, streets cracked and overgrown with weeds. And the mine was just a gaping hole in the mountainside, sealed with concrete and warning signs. Then the vision passed and everything looked normal again, or what passed for normal in this place. I ran back to Mrs. Patterson's house, desperate to pack my things and get out of town. But when I reached for my car keys, they weren't in my pocket. I searched my room frantically, then went downstairs to ask Mrs. Patterson if she'd seen them. She was in the kitchen, preparing what looked like the same pot roast she'd served the night before. When she turned to face me, I could see the wall behind her through her translucent body. "Looking for these?" she asked, holding up my keys. They passed right through her fingers and clattered to the floor. "I have to go," I said, backing toward the door. "There's been a mistake. I shouldn't be here." "Oh, but you are here," she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality. "You're one of us now, don't you see? Millbrook needs people, needs life. We can't let the town die." I grabbed my keys from the floor and ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door itself might as well have been welded shut. I threw my shoulder against it, kicked it, pounded on it with my fists. Nothing. "The town takes care of its own," Mrs. Patterson said behind me. "We're a community here. We look out for each other." I spun around to face her, but she was gone. The kitchen was empty except for the smell of rotting meat and the sound of something bubbling on the stove. I tried every door and window in the house, but they were all sealed. The windows showed me the street outside, but when I broke one with a chair, there was nothing behind the glass but solid concrete. The house was a trap designed to look normal from the inside while keeping me prisoner. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time seemed to move differently in that house. Sometimes it was light outside the windows, sometimes dark, but the quality of the light never changed. It was always that gray, overcast glow that made everything look like it was underwater. I found food in the kitchen, the same pot roast, over and over again. It tasted like nothing, but it kept me from starving. There was water from the taps, though it had a metallic taste that reminded me of blood, and gradually I began to understand what had happened to me, what had happened to all of us. The town was dying, had been dying since the mine disaster. But the dead don't always stay dead, especially when they have nowhere else to go. The people of Millbrook had refused to accept that their home was gone, that their lives were over. They'd created a bubble of false reality, a place where the town still existed, where people still lived and worked and went about their daily lives. But maintaining that illusion required energy, required life. And occasionally someone would wander into their trap, a lost traveler, a curious journalist, someone who could feed their desperate need to keep existing. I don't know how long I was in that house. Long enough to feel my own life draining away bit by bit. Long enough to see my reflection in the mirror grow pale and translucent. Long enough to stop feeling hungry or thirsty or tired. And then one day I found myself sitting on the porch of Mrs. Patterson's house, watching the empty street. A car crested the hill at the edge of town, a rental car with out-of-state plates. It pulled over and I could see the driver checking his GPS, looking confused. I stood up, smoothing down my clothes, and walked toward the general store. I had work to do. The town needed visitors, needed life to keep the illusion going. The bell jingled as I pushed open the door. Behind the counter, I arranged my face into what I hoped was a welcoming expression and waited for the stranger to come inside. "Help you with something?" I heard myself say when he finally entered, looking around with that same mixture of curiosity and unease that I remembered feeling so long ago. He was a young man, maybe a photographer or another journalist. He had that eager, slightly naive look of someone who thought he was about to discover something wonderful. I gave him directions to Mrs. Patterson's house and watched him leave, already knowing how his story would end, how it had to end. Because Millbrook takes care of its own, we're a community here, we look out for each other, and we never ever let anyone leave.